welcome to our for real last session of office hours for 2024. I think we said that last time, but then we were like, tricked ya, we decided to do another one. But my name is Celeste Scott, and I'm the horticulture specialist over here in the Western region in Jackson, Tennessee. So happy to have y'all with us. We have been doing office hours for several years now, and we just think that this is so much fun, and we hope y'all do too. So we take this opportunity for us all to get together. We have agents from across the state. You know, it's not always the same group of folks because everybody can't be here for every time. And we just like to entertain y'all's questions. We have this really fun question portal that you can submit questions ahead of time, and you can even attach photos if you have a picture to go along with that question. And then we just kind of sort through those and pick out some of those that we think are most timely to be able to feature live during our discussion today. And I will have to say, we were very heavy on woody ornamental type questions for this session. So we are not going to get to entertain all of those live, but we are answering them all, and you will be emailed the answer. So if your question doesn't get featured, don't worry, you will still get an answer to that question. So I would just say, welcome. We are so glad that y'all are here. I hope that some of you, this might actually be your first time at an office hours. Hopefully we have some folks who are joining us from our Welcome Home series that we just finished in October. That was a statewide program. We had counties all across the state participated in that. So if this is your first time here in office hours, we welcome you, and we're just gonna get the ball rolling. So let's start with that area of woody ornamentals. And I don't know who wants to go first. What question do we want to start with? And y'all just lead me in that direction, and I'll start getting pictures pulled up, and then we'll just let the conversation go where it will. Lee, do we want to start
Sure.
with that fungus question?
Well, I was thinking, or we could start with the drought question potentially, since it's raining today, right?
I know, a little. Are y'all getting some more rain? I hope you're getting more than we are. It's just like barely was a drizzle last night. The majority went south of us. So
yeah, we've been pretty steady, but it's been all night. So yeah, welcome everyone. Good to see you all. I'm Lee Rumble over in Knoxville, Tennessee. I serve all of Knox County as a commercial horticulture agent and a certified arborist. And do you want me just to field the question, Celeste?
Yeah, go.
Okay,
You go for it, and I'll get
perfect.
the picture up here.
Okay, yeah. So we had a question, I think, of a red maple that was sent in, and someone had questioned, you know, just the leaves were turning brown kind of out at the main ends or the growing tips of that tree primarily. Yeah, that's the one.
Is that it?
That's it. Yeah. So just a little bit of marginal necrosis there, you know, which is just death. And, you know, first and foremost, I would ask, you know, how much have you been watering over the last 2 months? You know, I think that would be important because this really looks like what we would call acute drought stress, meaning just a short-term situation where we haven't had enough adequate rainfall or supplemental irrigation to sustain that foliage. I went and pulled rainfall data for September, October, and November. September, we had about 1/3 of an inch. October, we had 1/2 of an inch. So November, we've had absolutely no rainfall. So over these, you know, almost 70 days, we're talking about less than 1 inch of rainfall over 70 days. So, you know, in that amount of time, we probably would have liked to have seen 7 or 8 inches of rainfall. So I might ask, you know, how much have you watered that tree, you know, over the last 70 days? So get a soil probe, stick it down in the ground, see if that soil's coming out dry or if it's coming out wet. And if we're not getting 1 inch to 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches a week, go ahead and water those trees and shrubs.
Good answer. Okay. So I feel like this one, this kind of follows right in those footsteps because we're just talking about general browning. And Lee, you answered this one as well. It's the one about the arborvitae. And I know that we have already been getting questions on this, and it is common. And so let's just go ahead and talk about that since we're talking about browning and what should be browning and what shouldn't be browning. Yeah. And I'll get that pulled up for us.
I like it. Yeah. So someone had mentioned planting back in February, which was after the freeze. Thank goodness. You know, they probably didn't have any major negative effects of that after planting. But they mentioned that, the middle of the plant was turning brown, and it's kind of hard to see here. I mean, I see a little bit in there, but
Yeah.
this looks fairly normal to me, Celeste. I put, nothing really major to fear here. This is kind of a normal growth response of arborvitae. Even in the fall, our evergreens are going to shed some of those needles. Oftentimes, they're interior needles, which was
Mm-hmm.
why I kind of wasn't that worried. I tell everyone, look at the growing tips of your plant. If those are turning brown, that's a completely different story. But, even evergreens will shed their needles or their leaves over time. So, I really am not stressing this one too much. I will bring up one other comment. I know you all mentioned watering this plant, and that's a great thing. And it also had mentioned that they had fertilized, and I don't know exactly when the fertilization occurred, but be careful about late season fertilization. Generally we want to do that during the growing season for arborvitae. But the biggest thing here is a cultural practice. So I want you to get inside of that arborvitae and pull
Mm-hmm.
out some of that fallen debris that's starting to hang in those little branch unions of the plant. And what that'll do is help encourage, greater sunlight penetration and airflow through that canopy. So it's a good cultural practice.
Yeah, for sure. And I tried to zoom in on that picture a little bit so you can see right here just how healthy the tips, that outer growth of that plant is. And all of that browning is happening right there on the inside. And this is a hard thing for a lot of people to, wrap their heads around. They're like, well, I just don't understand. It's evergreen. Like, why, is this happening? And so I always encourage people to try to think like a plant, right? So if we're putting our energies into growing new parts, and then we have some on the inside that aren't receiving light anymore, it's natural for those parts of that plant, for that tree to let go of those portions of the plant. And that's true even with deciduous trees. Like think of, an oak tree or pecan tree that does a lot of self pruning. Any of that under canopy growth, when it gets shaded out, it's the plant's going to let it go because it's not contributing to the whole picture. So that's normal. And if that is happening for you, don't freak out. Don't worry about it. I noticed it actually on one of mine as well, an American pillar the other day, and I gave it a good shake and it all started falling out, and then I felt better.
Yeah,
So
great practice.
if it's really worrying you, and you just give it a good shake and get that out of there so you don't have to look at it anymore, for sure. Okay.
And I'll put in, we get calls in the spring on magnolias, evergreens, and then
Yes.
dropping leaves, and people are freaking out and worried about it. But on those evergreen magnolias, that's just naturally what they do. They shed those old leaves, put on new. It's just a natural process.
Yes, for sure. Oh, goodness. Okay, let's see. Where do we want to go now? What if we kind of shift directions for a minute and go towards some flower related questions? Justin, did you have one on there about some drift roses?
Hey Celeste, yeah, I did. I'll be glad to answer that question. So I'm Justin Stefanski. I'm the hort agent here in Rutherford County. And a question came in about drift roses and what do they need to do to overwinter these, and should you do any pruning now at this time of year? So simple answer is definitely no pruning this time of year. This is a general rule of thumb that we say. Now, minor pruning can be done anytime throughout the summer, but once you approach the end of summer into fall, you definitely want to avoid making any cuts simply because there's a risk there of stimulating new growth. Also, when you're opening up fresh wounds, think back to our December 23rd freeze of last year. If you had a big open wound on a plant that hadn't had a chance to heal or callus over yet, that could cause some serious dieback and some branch deaths. So, pruning wise, don't touch them till probably, let's say, late February, early March. Right when things are starting to break dormancy. This is the time of the year that recovery conditions are most ideal and the plants have their most maximum stored energy to help replenish new growth. Now, in terms of what can be done to overwinter these, in certain parts of the country, I'm from Ohio, and people will wrap their roses in burlap. It's windy, it's cold. I definitely do not think that's a necessity here in Tennessee. But if you wanted to put in 2 or 3 inches of some type of an organic mulch layer around the root system, you can use pine bark mulch, pine straw, some type of a mulch product. If you put a thin layer there, 2-3 inches above the root system, that will at least ensure that you're keeping those root systems insulated and healthy for spring regrowth.
And I'll throw in like, don't freak out if you're like, oh, I already cut them all the way back. Like drift roses, shrub roses, think knockouts, things like that. They're resilient. So if you've already whacked it off, you haven't done yourself in. But just for, like Justin said, those good best management practices, keep that tucked into your mind, like as we move forward, right? That there are all those different risks associated with that, but not too huge of a deal if you've already done that. Wouldn't you think, Justin?
I think so. Yeah. Roses are tough. So, in a normal winter setting, December 23rd last year was a freak incident. Let's hope that never happens again for all my fellow agents.
And I know that we didn't have a question on like hybrid tea roses, but when we talk about these shrub roses, it's natural to kind of dump them into the same management tactics that we might take for hybrid tea roses. And that actually is not always the case. We tend to have heavy disease, like foliar disease pressures on our hybrid tea roses, and leaving that debris and cane that is showing signs of disease through the fall and winter isn't always the best. That's not the best management practice if you're having those heavy disease pressures. So you'll see a lot of people, especially folks who have larger collections of hybrid teas all planted together. They're doing quite a bit of fall pruning and cleanup just to help try to manage those disease pressures, right? So could be confusing to some people if you were kind of in both worlds, a foot in both of those situations. Any other tips or things that we might want to throw in for other types of roses? Anybody?
I would say like you said, with the shrub roses, the knockouts, don't be afraid to prune them back heavily. People will often just lightly prune. Don't be afraid to prune them back heavily so you do get that airflow, that light penetration for disease problems and things like that. So with the hybrid teas, you want to be a little more specific with your pruning. Like you said, a little more specific with timing and how you prune them. But the shrub type roses like knockouts, drift roses, don't be afraid to really whack them back.
Good tips. Actually, I looked out my kitchen window just yesterday and I have a red bud on one of my hybrid teas. It's just bursting, waiting to come open. And we actually just had our first series of frost. We had frost 3 days in a row last week here in West Tennessee. So we had a very nice long growing season, but that bud was still really nice and tight. It didn't get hurt one bit by that frost. And now we warmed back up with some 80-degree days, and I'm going to have a beautiful rose to cut here in the next day or so. So enjoying some of this crazy random weather that Tennessee throws at us for sure. Okay, what about, Lee, do we want to go back to this fungi question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, and I'm just going to let you take it, and I'll pull up pictures so you can entertain the question.
Yeah, that's fine. So we had a submission that someone had potentially identified a mushroom on one of their large oak trees. They had called it Laetoporus sulphureus, which we may commonly refer to as chicken of the woods. You've probably all heard or seen this mass growing at the base of a tree. And, I'm going to talk a little bit generally about fungi, I guess. And, first and foremost, when we do see a fruiting body, an actual fungus on a tree, it's important to realize that we're really only seeing a very tiny portion of that true fungus. Fungi are actually comprised of hyphae, and Celeste has an image pulled up here, and you can kind of see those individual hyphae here. Now, this is not the image that was sent in. This is just something to kind of give a general idea of hyphae, but these hyphae basically create metabolites and enzymes, and their role in nature is to break down wood. We've seen this before commonly, but when we get multiple hyphae inside of that tree, we have what's known as a mycelial mat. And Celeste, that's that next image, if you have it, the one of all the hyphae there. And generally, when we have an area with a lot of degraded material, we'll see these mycelial mats cover large areas of the forest floor. If you've ever gone out and pulled up leaf litter, you're likely to see this second image that Celeste is grabbing now.
Can you see it?
No, I can. I still see the old one there, Celeste.
Okay.
Is
Well,
it
that's
not up
okay.
yet? That's all right. Yeah.
I already thought I was sharing it. Let me try
Oh,
that
no
again.
worries. Yeah, no
I
worries.
was like, yeah, they can see that for sure.
Yeah, but the reality here is if the identification is correct, yeah, it's perfect. There's the mycelial mat, and what it's doing is basically sending out these individual threads, the hyphae, and they're looking for something to degrade, either leaf material or wood in the case of the question. So that's really important. Now, if we think about, that mushroom, that's what's known as the sporocarp. It's just the sexually productive portion of the fungus. It's a stage, it's a growth stage. So I know you mentioned that you had gone out and pulled that mushroom off the tree, but unfortunately, it may make you feel better, but it really hasn't done much to take care of the individual hyphae or the mycelium that is found throughout that tree. Now, Laetoporus, the chicken of the woods, is unfortunately both parasitic and saprobic on oaks. So not only is it parasitizing the tree, which could potentially kill that tree, it's also creating a brown rot, which leaves us behind these real cube-like nature. And, again, that Laetoporus kind of resides in the phylum of Basidiomycota, which are known as wood destroyers. And Celeste has pulled up a great example. This is the role of fungi in nature. I was walking through the forest one day and this is what I saw. I thought, man, where did that tree go? And I went over and looked, and sure enough, it had been decomposed by the wood decay fungi. You still see a few strips of bark in the foreground, but that back area where Celeste is pointing is completely gone. So, I know I've made a short answer really long, Celeste, but call an arborist, first and foremost. That's what I would say, because Laetoporus is one that could potentially lead to a wind throw situation as that wood is compromised. As a brown rot, it's destroying all the cellulose in that canopy and leaving behind just the lignin. So call an arborist, have them come out. They can sound the tree. We can look at different techniques through sounding or sonic tomography to try and determine the amount of risk that tree has. But don't neglect it. Do something about it. Call an arborist for sure.
Thank you so much. I was so excited when you sent me those pictures. Those were excellent. And the discussion really, from the beginning to end, really helps you understand that question that seems so simple at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
But if we can understand that whole process, I feel like that just improves that understanding, so
right.
folks can really take the appropriate actions. So excellent answer. Thank you so much. Let's see, what next? How about this was a fun question. I had one came in, they said, can you repot trees like willows, oaks, maples that have gone dormant already for the winter? And the picture they sent in, they were like in little pots, right? So I don't know if maybe they got them as saplings and potted them up maybe, this past spring, or maybe they just purchased them during the growing season this year and didn't have an opportunity to get those in the ground. But they're wondering if they could repot them and then, or how do they store them through the winter months? So this is kind of a two-part question and might not be hitting exactly what they wanted to know. But the easy part is, yeah, sure, you could go ahead and repot those if you wanted to. But fall is a great time to plant those types of plants. So you could go ahead and actually plant them in their forever homes if you know where that's going to be or have those places prepared. So I know we talked about this a lot the last time we met, fall planting and the benefits that it provides. But once, especially think about like a deciduous tree, it's already dropped off its leaves. So it's not putting any of the energies into maintaining those leaves anymore. So any energy that it has, it's going to put into root development. And I know we had a very, very dry fall, as Lee pointed out earlier, but hopefully, traditionally, we have a lot more rain in the wintertime. So as long as those plants are getting the adequate moisture and we have good planting practices, not planting them too deeply and making sure we get that root zone mulched really well, those plants would do fine if you just went ahead and got them planted out right now. if you are just wanting to overwinter them in their containers because you don't have, the places ready for them to be planted in yet, or whatever that reason is, I would say for overwintering them, make sure that you have a place where you can put them where they're going to get a little bit of protection, because those roots, if they were planted in the ground, are going to get insulated from the fluctuations in temperatures that we're going to have. And when they're in a pot, they're much more exposed. So if we do have a freak polar vortex event like we had earlier this winter, again, you want to make sure that they're in an area where those roots would have a better chance at surviving because they'd be more exposed. Also, this is something that I have done before and tried to not do again. Make sure that they're getting rain, that they're in a place where they can receive just, any natural rain that may be falling, because I tend to not keep the majority of my water hoses plugged up in the wintertime because I don't like to drain them every time there's a chance of freeze. So, just generally people aren't doing a ton of hand watering through the winter months. So if you're trying to keep those over the winter, make sure that they're in a place where they can receive plenty of natural rain. Any other thoughts, friends?
The only thing I might mention, and Justin's already answered this, but someone had asked kind of a similar question, how much to water them. And I think Justin gave the best answer, right? This is our rain gauge, fill the soil. If it's dry, go ahead and water. We don't want stagnant water in those pots, but we also don't want that soil to dry out completely. So stick your finger down in the soil 3-4 inches if you can in that pot, and see, if it is dry, get a little bit of water. There's no one blanket answer, I don't think, for that question.
Yeah, that's always a hard one. How much water is too much? How much is not enough? And that one is always a tough one. Okay, so we had 2 more questions that came in this morning. So I'm so happy that y'all are seeing those reminders and using the question portal. But we didn't have these pre-answered, but I think we have a great panelist of folks here who can get us some answers. So this person is asking about, they're saying, is it beneficial to mulch and fertilize? They said feed, but I think what they're essentially trying to get at is fertilize large established trees like oaks, magnolias, and maple trees before winter. So who wants to take that one and explain to us when the best time for fertilizing, if any additional fertilizer is even needed? Taylor, do you have thoughts? I see you smiling.
Well, I was trying to get to my mute button. I couldn't find it. Yeah. So with fertilization, now there's always contrary opinions on when the best time is to fertilize. For me, the best time to fertilize is when the plant's going to actively use that fertilizer. So when the plant's actively growing, we're not wasting that fertilizer. So as we're going into a period of dormancy, the plant's a lot less likely to utilize that fertilizer. And so it can go to waste. You don't want to throw money on the ground and watch it wash away. We want the plant to actually use it. So usually I am an advocate for fertilizing when we get that first flush of growth, when we're getting that new growth in the springtime. Now you will see people say, hey, fall fertilization is okay. And, I've read the data, potassium and things like that go towards root health and things like that. But pumping a lot of nitrogen onto your plant before we're going into a period of dormancy, not really a necessity.
Yes, we want to stay away from that for sure. Because if you're pressing a lot of new tender vegetative growth, and then we get a cold snap, you're going to have quite a bit of winter damage there on the tips.
Which we saw with the freeze damage from last year, and people were like, I got to get it. Oh, by the way, I'm Taylor Reeder. I'm the horticulture agent in Williamson County. So sorry. But we saw that with a lot of the shrubs last year. They looked dead. People wanted to pump full of fertilizer. They grew. And then in March, we had a late freeze and it knocked all that new growth back.
Good answers. Oh, and then one more thing I'll throw in is that say that you've got some shade trees that are just growing in your lawn area. If you're actively managing your turf with a fertilization program, you're probably not going to need any additional fertilizer. for those mature trees. So that's kind of a standing
Yes.
recommendation as well.
Yes, the large tree is going to have a big root system and should be able to find the nutrients it needs unless you've got a specific situation that calls for fertilization. We don't really need to consistently fertilize large, mature, established trees.
Yay, excellent. And then the last one that we're going to entertain for woodies before we move on to another section is involving crepe myrtles. So here, I'll go ahead and pull up that picture because this might be something that a lot of folks are dealing with. So they're asking, can they go ahead and prune off these suckers? If y'all can see you can see my screen. You see right here where my cursor is, these are suckers that are just popping up from the ground. There's even some way out here, probably 3 or 4 feet away from this main trunk. They're asking if they can go ahead and prune those back. And then if they can do anything for like a few of these lower limbs that are kind of hanging out and causing some problems right here. They're asking, is now the time? Should they wait? Is there any time of the year that they should specifically avoid for pruning? And I'll jump in with my opinion on the suckers and dead plant material or material that is causing damage or in the way. Like if this is hanging out over your driveway, prune it off like anytime, right? So that's dead, diseased type, plant material. Go ahead, chop those suckers off. You don't want them. They're not helping anything by sitting there all throughout the winter. Go all the way down to the ground, make a nice flush cut right there. But if you're wanting to do a lot of pruning, which this crepe myrtle looks like it has really nice structure, if they're going to do anything, they might just kind of thin out the canopy here. And any kind of that type of structural type pruning, I would not do that right now. So
Yeah.
who else wants to add in?
I agree. That's perfect, Celeste. Yeah, don't be worried about snipping off a few suckers at the base or lower limbs that are in the way, throughout the growing season. And even this late in the fall is fine, but I couldn't agree more. If you're going to do major structural changes to any woody shrub or tree, you're probably going to be better off holding off till February, March, early spring. And then as that new flush comes out, let it go ahead and develop those leaves fully. And then maybe in May, if you see a few that you've missed, you come in and do a little bit of summer pruning on that. But yeah, generally you want to taper off your pruning really about Labor Day. But again, a few suckers like this, not a major concern. So go ahead and do that now. It won't be a problem.
And then the back end, go ahead, Taylor, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to tag along with Lee, and usually I say around February. So I find it's a lot easier because the leaves are gone and I can see better what needs to be pruned. So doing that structural pruning, that removing of inside canopy, crossing rubbing branches, that kind of thing, it's a lot easier to see when there aren't leaves on the tree. So that's another advocate for pruning in the dormant season.
And I liked how they, on the tail end of that question, they said, and is there any time that I need to avoid pruning? Because I know that y'all have heard us talk a lot when we're involving flowering trees and shrubs, that timing of pruning can affect the flower display, but for certain types of plants. But for crepe myrtles, they bloom on new wood each and every year. So there is really, no time that you need to be specific about avoiding because they're gonna flower on new wood. So yay.
And
so
just one more note.
Yes.
Celeste, those trunks looked a little black. Check that crepe myrtle for aphids or crepe myrtle bark scale. I'll just say that.
They did. I couldn't tell if it was a shady picture or shadows or if they really were really dark, but for sure, definitely, if you're on the call and that was your picture, check it out.